Hello again. Happy New Year. January 2025. Can you believe it? So I'm kind of doing an updated, I guess you could say refined. I always talk about refining flies and how you can find better ways to tie them. Sometimes it's because of materials that get released. Maybe you just, you fish a fly for a while and you start to find things that you can alter or change in it that might make it better. So today we're going to do the Goat Rodeo 2.0. This is what I would consider kind of like a jerkbait style fly. This is the version we're going to tie today, and I'm going to discuss it briefly here real quick. But essentially this is on a 26-degree jig hook up front. There's actually one or two cones buried in this depending on how much you want it to do this vertical action, so it works like a jig, like a vertical jig, or kind of like a jerkbait. So when you strip it and pause it, it does a lot of this stuff in the water. It's a pretty deadly little fly. The original versions of it, and I'm going to insert a picture right here. Be honest with you, the best thing you can do is look yourself in the mirror when you come up with an idea, and it's good, but it could definitely be refined. The very first versions of this, in my opinion, were very overdressed, had too much weight in them, and then over time kind of refined to this. This is probably version 2, I guess you could say. These are the ones I currently have in the store. These are still kind of heavy. There's 2 tungsten cones in there, a pair of tungsten beads in the connection, which I think is overkill. So I guess we could say that this is probably the Goat Rodeo 3.0. Lot less weight based off of new materials that I'm using. There's only, like I said, 1 or 2 cones, and a lot of times I'm only fishing a brass cone in there. No more tungsten beads in the connection, using a teardrop bead. But yeah, this thing's pretty killer. If you're looking for another fly that you can fish on a floating setup or an intermediate instead of using a integrated sink, this is a pretty good one. So we're going to tie it in this yellow and brown. So the first hook I have in the vise here, pardon, I've got a little bit of a cold. This is an Arex 610 number 2. Because we're going to do this in a yellow and a brown kind of configuration, we're going to use some yellow thread, but you can do whatever you want. It's entirely up to you. So we'll start our thread right at the eye, and I'm going to just work a base of thread right to about where the beak is on that hook. Now we're going to take, and you can do 2 mini barred MFC marabou plumes. It's the best way to do this. As you see here, what I like to do is I'm going to go in on the stem, and I'm going to cut this right there, so I only have that much, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other one if it affords me the ability to do so, and then save that extra piece. Then we're going to take the 2 feathers together, as you see here, line up the barring. I like the tails long on these, kind of like how Russ Madden does on a lot of his flash flies, circus peanuts. I like them a little bit longer, so I'm going to make this tail on this a little bit longer than the whole shank of the fly. Just bind that right down. And if you do this correctly, you're not going to have a lot there, as you'll see. Minimal amount of flash in this. This was one of those patterns, and I think why this one evolved is because I was looking for a fly that had less flash in it, was predominantly synthetic, was going to shed water. So the original versions had a lot of brushes in these running through the center, whether it was a streamer brush or a EP anadromous brush. And to be quite honest with you, it was just too much. It was overkill. So I'll show you what I've subbed this out with. You probably already know. So I'm going to take 1 strand of Firefly. I'm just going to run it down the near side, closest to the tire. Fold it over, go right down the far side. And I like that flash to be longer than the marabou tail. Just leave it there. So what I've subbed in here now, and this gives me the ability to use less material. I can keep it pretty muted, is obvious reasons. That new Senyo Super Satin Polar Chenille. I'm going to use a brown large on this because I want to have a brown underbody. So let's tie this in. Go just behind the eye. You can use your rotary function if you want. I'm going to do it by hand. So I like less on the back end of this, so I just I spiral wrap it, as you'll see here. Every turn, I don't lose. Every turn you just preen it rearward a little bit. I want to have less mass on the rear of this. It should be that way on all your articulated streamers. If you're not doing that, you're probably wondering why they're not swimming correctly. Trim that off, save it. Go right down over the butt ends of that. Build a nice little thread base. You can use a wire brush if you'd like. If some of those satin chenille fibers aren't doing what you want. Next thing we're going to do is use a little bit of Arctic Fox. You guys know this is one of my favorite materials. I tie most of my streamers with this. It's right up there with bucktail in my book. You're not changing my mind on that. But that's just me. That's the cool thing about this. We all have our nuances and things we like to do. So find yourself a small bundle of Arctic Fox hair. Brush out all that under fur. Now I want this to bleed into that tail. So I cut that. And we're going to reverse tie it. I'm just going to roll that right around the hook. Flatten that out. Get myself a tube here. Stand by. So I know there's all these funky little cool contraptions that are available. I think one of them is the John. I've broken every one of those I've used, by the way. For just, you know, reversing bucktail, any kind of hair. I use clear tubing. My reasoning behind that is I can see exactly where all my fibers are going. It's clear, relatively rigid. Believe it or not, these pieces like this size usually come with a pair of Dr. Slick scissors if you tie with those. But you can find this tubing like Home Depot, whatever. You can even order it online. So I just dropped it. And once that's in place, put a 1/2 inch. Four-turn whip finish. Trim your thread, your tail's done. Let me find my tube because I'm going to need that again. And I'll show you when we get to the front half of this. I use a larger section. It's rather helpful for getting, yeah, got a couple of them here actually. I'll show you in a second. And you can put your head cement, UV resin, whatever works for you, right over those thread wraps. Just like you see here. Excuse me. That's that. You got any errant hairs? You can cautery them. Use your cautery tool. Get them out of there. That's it. Grab your piece of wire. There's a million ways you can do this. I'm so used to tying copious amounts of flies. I just put it in, bend it, put my bead on there and go. Set it aside. So it should look something like that. Now, our front hook is a 26-degree jig hook, as you see here. A lot of the guys use these for, I know Tommy Lynch, I think, uses these for his drunken Strolis. So you can get that head that digs. But I use this for this jerkbait style fly. This is I think it's an Arex 650. This is a 1/0. So I go up 2 sizes on this. This is just to give me a little bit more length. And I've already put my 2 beads on there, and they're tungsten cones. I typically run 1 tungsten and 1 brass, or I'll do both brass. Doesn't necessarily need to be super heavy. It all depends on the kind of water you're going to be fishing. What you may have to do is take a pair of flat pliers and flatten out that barb to get those over. It all depends. These are even slotted. But you'll see if you use a medium and a large, or a small and a medium, you'll get a nice taper. The old version of this fly, when I tied it, we just put a couple of eyes on the front and then used resin around the head. But for this new version, I use a mask. It makes it come out a lot cleaner. So we're going to push our 2 cones right on there. We're going to start our thread behind them. We're going to go right about where the bend is on the hook. Take our tail. We want our hooks going in the same direction. So you know the deal. 1, 2, 3. Pull it. Try not to mess with your wire. Kind of like you see there. If the wire's a little long like this one piece is, cut it with your bad scissors. So we're going to do 4 courses of thread. That's 2, 3, and there's 4. You can put a 1/2 inch if you want. Now to keep that back end out of the way, there's a little silicone deal there. The magnets. That's the best thing I found today. Now to make our little collar in there, take that one of the 2 pieces of the lower section of that marabou you used, and I kind of want that to bleed into the rear piece just enough. And so we're just going to take that, lay it right on top of the hook, as you see here. Take 1 turn, 2 loose turns, and then pull down on it. And then you can just kind of wrap over it a little bit. Clip off your butt sections, get rid of that. Just make sure you secure them. And then bring your thread right back to where you started. And if you've done this right, you've built a nice little collar in there. Next thing we're going to do, go right back to our satin chenille. This time we're going to wrap this in close consecutive wraps, as you see here. Like I said, if you got a rotary function on your vise, it's a great time to use it. I'm just going to do it by hand. Every 3rd one you can kind of give it a little pull. It's going to give you a little bit more mass up near the front. You want to make sure when you tie this stuff in that the fibers are laying rearward, or else you're going to be fighting it the whole time. Now we want to stop. Take 1 more turn. Give yourself enough space. 3 over, 3 in front, to lay our collar in there. It's a good time to take your wire brush, pull some material out. There you go. 1 more strand of flash, 1 in the front, 1 in the back, tied in the middle. It's right in here. 1, 2, 3, fold it over, 2, 3. I want that to bleed into the back. Cut it, go back, get your fox tail. Same thing, less is more. You don't need a lot on here. The beauty of that is too, it's kind of like as time has progressed with some of these weighted nymphs, the guys who've gotten really adept at fishing them are fishing lighter and lighter flies now. Stuff that sinks relatively quickly. It's the same theory here with this style fly. That's why I guess you could say this is the 3.0, right? Trim the end. It's going to be a little more difficult to roll this around that hook this time. So you're going to have to kind of maneuver that fiber. Take 2 loose turns. Take a look at it. Maneuver it around. It should be relatively sparse. And then you can just build a little collar. And you'll see as you move forward, it's going to kind of push that stuff rearward. I used to just take the cones and push them back to help me with it. But once I found this same thing, larger piece of tube, I can go right over the top of all of that. Even the 2 cones, as you see here. And then I'm just going to take, and just like I do on the headbanger, alter ego, all those. I'm just going to kind of cone it out. Reverse tie it. Brush that fox fur. Just to make it better. Now I put a whip finish in there. Now, the old variation of this used like laser dub, but now I'm using, this is a really good synthetic. It's another Laterra product. It's the carnivore dub. I'm going to use it in the yellow color. He calls it something He-Man, but you don't, there's going to be 2 bundles of this. When I tell you sparse, super sparse. So I take the 2 of these together, put them right over either side. I'm going to advance my thread to the front of that Arctic Fox bundle, take 1 turn, 2 turns, 3, pull straight up, fold that stuff rearward, advance my thread in front, take 2 turns, and then half hitch it. Then what I'm going to do, now you can if you want, it's not really go anywhere. I'm going to advance my thread over the cone, so that over that first cone, which is the rearward one, bring it right in front, take a couple turns, another half hitch. Okay? We're going to take another 2 very, very sparse amounts of this. Like this. Do the same thing along both sides of the cones. And now we're going to cinch these down between them. So it's 1 turn loose, 2 turns, pull it down, and you'll see that's going to kind of seat it. 3, come straight up, bring the stuff rearward, take a couple turns, and now we're going to whip finish in between the 2 cones. Now you got to watch your thread because it will try to chase it. Perfect. Then cut it off. Before we do anything, you're going to take a wire brush, kind of brush some of this stuff out. Less is more on this. You don't need a lot, and you don't want a lot, actually. You want just enough to give it some color, as you see here. Now you're going to take your regular medium or thin resin, and you're actually going to put a layer over that first cone, the one that's still exposed, just a thin layer over the back half of it, as you see here. And then you're going to actually bleed a little bit right into the seam between the 2. You don't need a lot. This is a number 6 mask. You're going to push that mask all the way up and on to the 2 cones. So much so that you're going to leave yourself a space in the front of here. Hit it with your torch. That'll actually lock it in place. It's not going anywhere. Next thing we're going to do, we're going to reattach our thread. Now this is important. This is a quick little trick here I'm going to show you. If you don't want this to pop off, because I'm going to tell you, over time if you fish this, because this style of fly will come in close proximity to the bottom sometimes if you're fishing a shallow gravel run. You know, you could cast it off something, bang it off something. You could knock this whole head right off. So, when you reattach your thread, because we're going to build a little thread cone in front of it, what I like to do after I get that going, and I'll put a half hitch on there, is I'm going to take some Loctite brush on super glue and go right on the thread, as you see here. Wrap that on there, half hitch it, do one more little turn of it, just like you see here. And you don't need a lot, you need just a small little bead on there. And I'm going to do a couple of 4 or 5 turn whip finishes on here. There's one, pull it pretty tight, enough to build a cone so that that's not going to come off, as you'll see here. Yep. Boom. That seep in. That'll typically help in the durability of that. Then we're going to just take a thin layer, bone dry. Try not to crowd the eye like I just did. quick thing to do with that is, where's my bodkin? Take your bodkin, go right in like so. There we go. Hit that with your torch. What you do for eyes is entirely up to you. It's personal preference. I had a guy busting my stones not too long ago. Why do you always use the same eye? Because these are the ones I like. Be honest with you, you don't even really need them. But when in doubt, I like eyes on my streamers. I like these red oblong pupil deals. One there. One on the other side. And then, same thing. Take your thin or medium resin, and you'll see there'll be, I usually use a size in these, it's just smaller than the eye well on these masks. That settle first, bake it, same thing on the other side. Now I know people will argue, I don't know any bait fish that have eyes up near the head like that, but it's more of a reactionary style fly. You're triggering a response. You heard Kelly talk about that in his latest podcast. A lot of truth behind that. See, I put a thin coat, bone dry over it. That's just to make sure that it's nice and non-tacky. There you go. That's the Goat Rodeo. I guess it's the 3.0 now, right? I'll zoom this out a little bit so you can see it fully. And you'll see that's kind of how it swims. So when it's going through the water column, it's kind of doing this. Fish is, like I said, like a jerkbait. Way sparser than the original and the second version. It's like I said with anything. If you're not trying to refine some of your flies, they're never perfect. You can always refine them. Sometimes new materials come out that make them so much easier to refine. A couple here, and I like to brush these out. You'll see here. This is one of the better colors like the fish, but I do these in about, I don't know, 8 or 10 different colors. A couple different olives and browns, tans and yellows, some black ones too. But that's the Goat Rodeo 3.0. Hope you like it. Catch you next month.